Hi everyone. It's always so embarrassing when you have to adjust that downward. I'm Bethany Barrett. I'm an Associate Professor of Political Science and Director of the Loundy Human Rights Project. And I wanted to welcome everyone to this wonderful conversation with Dr. Geoff Loftus. My colleague Sherry Berkowitz will more formally introduce Dr. Loftus in just a moment. But I wanted to just briefly thank a few other people that have made this series possible and just briefly describe the work of the Loundy Human Rights Project. I wanted to first and foremost thank Joe Loundy, who has made this project entirely possible. And briefly, what the Loundy Human Rights Project does is to engage undergrads in a completely unique way of looking at human rights here in the US and abroad. So we take a different focus topic each year and study it here in the context of Chicago by meeting with leaders in the field, both practitioners and scholars in the field, and then we go abroad to examine that in analogous sessions abroad. And so we get this really unique comparative experience. That is something that is, like I said, unique amongst undergrad programs here in the US. So anybody that is interested in more information, please see me afterward. I wanted to also thank Andrea Adams as well from the Arts and Sciences Department of Development, and also Dean Lynn Weiner and Julie Rowan from the College of Arts and Sciences. I also wanted to point out that we are set against this really powerful exhibit by Richard Ross, Juvenile Injustice, that looks at how juveniles are routed into and processed through the criminal justice system. And many of these images are from Chicago. So I encourage you to take a few minutes either before or after to have a look at some of these images and consider their meaning in the context of wrongful convictions. And that wrongful convictions can happen through a variety of ways, including through pressuring juveniles in various ways. I wanted to also thank especially my colleague Sherry Berkowitz in the Department of Psychology and the department generally. I'm not sure if Jim Choka, the chair, is here today. I don't think so. But Sherry has been just instrumental in making this whole series happen, so I've been very glad to collaborate with her for a second year. So without further ado, I will turn things over to her. And I also just wanted to also mention to everyone that there's one more program in this series on the 14th, and that'll be Dr. Richard Leo talking about false confessions. So I invite you to all join us then as well. Thanks.
Good afternoon. As Dr. Barrett just mentioned, I'm Sherry Berkowitz, and I'm an assistant professor here in the psychology department at Roosevelt. And it is an absolute honor and pleasure for me to introduce our next wrongful convictions distinguished speaker, Dr. Geoffrey Loftus, who is an internationally recognized scholar on topics of eyewitness memory and perception. Dr. Loftus received his bachelor's in experimental psychology from Brown University and his PhD in experimental psychology from Stanford University, where he studied under memory legend Richard Atkinson. Dr. Loftus then completed a postdoc at NYU with the impressive George Sperling, who is often credited for creating the field of iconic memory. And currently, Dr. Loftus is a professor of psychology at the University of Washington. In addition, he has held visiting professor positions at Stanford, the National Institute of Health, and MIT. Dr. Loftus is also a fellow of the prestigious American Association for the Advancement of Science. Dr. Loftus is a very productive researcher whose name is widely recognized by cognitive psychologists, lawyers, and psychology law scholars. He's the author of 7 books and approximately 100 scientific journal articles, and he's lectured all around the world on topics related to perception and memory. For his important work, Dr. Loftus has received numerous grants from the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Mental Health, including a recent grant for $1.2 million from NIMH for investigating various factors related to visual perception and memory. And in the not too distant past, he was also the editor of the prominent psychology journal Memory and Cognition. In addition to his research and teaching, and what he'll spend some time talking about today, is the fact that Dr. Loftus is commonly called upon as an expert witness and has worked on over 320 cases involving perception, memory, statistics, and video game behavior. And I know he'll tell us more about his interesting experiences tonight as an expert witness. And as a quick personal note, I want to say what a pleasure and special treat it is for me to have Dr. Loftus here tonight. Although I don't know that you remember Jeff. We actually met back in 2007 at the Psychonomics Conference in Long Beach, California. And at the time you were about to go give a talk, it was early in the morning. And at the time I was a graduate student at the University of California, Irvine, and my mentor is a very dear friend of Jeff's, and she encouraged me, well, go introduce yourself, go meet him. And so I came up to you right before you were about to give a talk, and she was also worried that you may not have had breakfast. And so I gave you a muffin. I don't know that you recall. So in keeping with tradition, in case you didn't have the chance to grab a snack, I have a muffin for you today in case you get hungry. But in all honesty and seriousness, I'm just thrilled that you accepted my invitation to speak here today, and I really appreciate it. I greatly admire your work, and I am proud to have you here tonight. So please help me give a warm welcome to Dr. Loftus, who will be discussing when she heard about human perception.
Thanks. That muffin made my day. It enabled me to give a reasonable talk rather than one that was done on no breakfast, no coffee, whatever. It's a pleasure to be here in Chicago. I've come here many, many times over the past 30 years or so, and it's one of my favorite cities in the world. I always jump at any chance I have to come back here. Whenever I give a talk here, I always try to find some cool picture of Chicago to use in my talk. This is my candidate for this time. So, as Sherry said, I'm going to talk about human perception and memory, which has been my day job, my research area ever since I entered psychology back in the dark ages. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how some of what I consider to be important aspects of research in human perception and memory can be applied to serious issues that you guys, I guess, have been talking about a lot in this series, having to do with eyewitness testimony. I'm sure most of you know about the Innocence Project. The Innocence Project is a nonprofit legal organization committed to exonerating wrongfully convicted people, principally, although not exclusively, through the use of DNA testing. And it's committed to reforming the criminal justice system to prevent further injustice. This actually came from their website, I think, but I believe every word of it. And they've been responsible for a lot of exonerations of demonstrably innocent people over the past 20 years or so. The Innocence Project was founded in 1992 by this guy, Barry Scheck, who about a decade later, with a couple of colleagues, wrote a book, sort of a seminal book at this point called Actual Innocence, 5 Days to Execution and Other Dispatches from the Wrongly Convicted. Of particular interest to me in this book was one of the principal reasons that Barry Scheck and his colleagues gave for why people who are later shown to be innocent of the crime that they're on trial for were convicted to begin with. And what he pointed out is that 84% of the wrongful convictions rested, at least in part, on mistaken identification by a witness. This is what he said about 20 years ago. Every time there's a new exoneration as they come rolling in, that percentage changes a little bit, but it usually hovers between 70 and 85%. So in other words, in a lot of the cases where people were shown to have been innocent, they were convicted principally on the basis of an eyewitness, like this guy here, who gets up on the stand, points to the defendant at trial, and says the words that every defense attorney reads, that's him, that's absolutely positive, I'll never forget that face as long as I live. And one of the other things that Scheck and his colleagues point out is that dramatic though as these results are, the fact that so many exonerations come from convictions based in part on eyewitness testimony, dramatic though that percentage is, they only confirm a century of social science research. And I want to spend a little bit of time today talking specifically about why, what that research is and how it relates to convictions that are of innocent people. So let me give you an illustration of, this is actually, to be completely honest here, not an actual case. It's a sort of a composite of a number of cases that I testified in California. But it, I think, very well makes some critical points. So in this case, Charles Jackson, not his real name, a 27-year-old African-American male, stood trial in Riverside, California, accused of mugging Lori Panich, a Caucasian female. At trial, from the witness stand, Ms. Panich, upon being asked to identify the man who mugged her, pointed to Charles Jackson and said those awful words. That's him. I'm absolutely positive I'll never forget that face as long as I live. Now, it's an intuitive fact of life, intuitive to just about everybody, but certainly intuitive to defense attorneys, that a witness who expresses great confidence in her identification is very persuasive to a jury. A witness says, yeah, that's the guy, I'm absolutely positive, it's blazoned into my mind, I'll never forget what he looks like. The jury is going to believe that this witness is probably true. That probably is the guy who committed the crime that he's on trial for. It is, however, a non-intuitive fact